If you want to learn more about eggs and never had the opportunity to take an agricultural education class, you should watch the entirety of this video. I do apologize because it is quite lengthy, but this was a conversation that we had in my life and career skills class today with many teachable moments that came up about eggs, the quality of eggs, aging of eggs, and some various other things. So hopefully you learned something from this, and I apologize if it's too long. His agricultural fact of the day pertained to eggs, and I happened to have eggs that had been sitting on the counter in my classroom for over 2 months. I had a pretty decent idea of when these eggs were laid, and I took that opportunity and ran with it and made it a very educational experience. So, today's agricultural fact of the day: one way to test the freshness of eggs is to use the float test in a cup of water. Eggs that are older float in the water where newer eggs sink to the bottom. The eggshell is porous, and as it ages, air permeates the shell, therefore causing the egg to float. I am never one to turn down a valuable and lasting educational experience opportunity for my students, even though sometimes it can be a little bit smelly and I take on more than I bargained for. But today's wasn't too bad. So we started with the float test. I made sure that yesterday, mental note, before I came to school today to grab fresh eggs, I grabbed the eggs that the chickens laid yesterday and that I collected. So I knew for a fact that those eggs were within 24 hours of being laid. These eggs are ones that I had intended on incubating back in October. They came out of my special breeding groups, and we never got around to setting them in the incubator. So they've just sat there, and I knew that they were there. I had planned on keeping them for this opportunity. I just didn't realize it would be 2 months after the fact. I started by putting these eggs in this water first. May have cracked that one. Nope, no crack. And they were able to clearly see that these eggs did, in fact, float. Now, I have two fresh eggs that were laid yesterday, and I put them in here as well with the other ones, and you can see that they sink. So that was lesson number one. I'm also infamous for getting off track. And although they are learning things, sometimes the conversation just goes in a different direction than I had originally anticipated it to. Typically, after I do this, I then demonstrate, I crack the eggs on a plate and demonstrate to them what the difference looks like as eggs age, because a lot of people don't understand that there is a difference when you buy older eggs versus fresher eggs, because eggs can stay good for a long period of time. So we had the conversation about decomposition. Now, the older eggs that are floating here were kept at room temperature for over 2 months. There's no cracks in these ones. There were cracks. One of the ones that I did crack open, there was actually a crack in it. And I had actually started to incubate this egg for about 24 to 48 hours before I realized there was a crack and I pulled it out of the incubator. This also lended itself to a very educational experience. So, first, the eggs that had floated, I cracked them on a plate in front of the students. I did this last year and it ended in a very stinky, smelly experience. I'm very thankful that this time it did not smell excessively, but they were able to see. So egg came from the blue egg shell, and the other one came from the brown egg shell. So they took some observations. The brown egg, the yolk had a richer color to it. And I explained to them these two eggs came from my breeding groups. One breeding group is kept in a coop and they have a chicken run that they can explore, but they don't get to free range. This tan egg came from chickens that have the ability to free range on certain days. So they got to see firsthand what the effect of being able to free range, the ability to forage and consume bugs may have on the appearance of the yolk. Now, they didn't do a taste test. It's a class of like 10 kids. I didn't feel that cooking up eggs was appropriate in this scenario, especially with those eggs being 2 months old. And after cracking these and talking to them about it, I cracked the fresh ones that had sank. And you can see another teachable moment here was that I had different eggshell colors because in my large chicken coop that these eggs came from, everybody's in general population. I have olive eggers, and many of the kids had never seen an olive egg before. So that provided me the opportunity to talk about genetics. So then I cracked them on the plate. We had this dark brown eggshell color here, which also was fresh and provided them the chance to see how different these egg whites behaved. The smaller egg, the egg white stayed around the egg yolk itself. The larger egg pooled out a little bit more, not to take away from the quality of yolk. So that's why I crack these, is so that they can see firsthand the quality difference of the yolk. As the egg ages, the yolk starts to decompose and break down, and you describe it as being flat like a pancake. I know you can't see it as well here, but in person, they were able to see and get down on a level and say, okay, these are definitely flatter. The quality has been compromised. Where these fresher eggs all sit up, like the yolk is up off of the plate. So that was another teachable moment. One other thing that I discussed during this class, now this was an entire class length of conversation. The kids were able to ask questions and I answered them. And we went over this pretty extensively. This was in my seventh grade home and life, or no, career, life and career skills class, which I feel is important. If they're going to be consumers, they should probably be familiar with quality of egg. Lastly, we discussed fertilized versus non-fertilized eggs, and I pulled a picture up on the board because it was a little bit more challenging for some of the students to see that. But the germinal disc and what that looks like in a fertilized versus a non-fertilized egg. And then I happened to remember that I had that one cracked egg that I had pulled out of the incubator. And I said, I know for a fact that I set this one because I have the date written on it. And most of the time, when I set eggs in my classroom, I write the date so that we don't end up with a ticking time bomb and eggs exploding in the incubator. And I know when they were set. So this one had incubated for about 2 days, I think. And I told them before I cracked it, I wasn't sure what it was going to look like. I didn't know what it was going to smell like, and that things could get real stinky real quick. So I cracked this, and I told them before I cracked it that even if a chick had started to develop, as soon as that chick ceases to exist, I took it out of the 99.8 degrees Fahrenheit temperature it was incubating at, and the veins would start to decompose. So they got to see that firsthand. This one's not as stinky as you would think. It does have a little bit of a smell to it, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be. That was their lesson today. And we didn't get to the reflection. I did pull up some of the hatcheries websites so that they could actually see that. The reaction when they saw the olive egg was priceless. So I didn't even think about it that a lot of students had never seen olive eggs before. And we talk about the nutritional value of eggs and how the eggshell color doesn't necessarily have any correlation to that. It depends on the diet of the chicken. But then, like, when I start crossing breeds, I get cool colorings. So this one's olive with like brown speckles on it. So all teachable moments. Anyway, I hope you learned something today.